of all, I want to thank you for inviting me. So far, it's been fun. I enjoyed this morning's session on the Gospel of John. So today I want to talk a little bit about Gnosticism, the subject, of course, you're not interested in at all. And I feel like I'm bringing coals to Newcastle, as they used to say, because I don't know, probably a lot of what I'm going to say here is not new to anybody. So you can complain afterwards. Let me just start from a quotation from the New Testament. Avoid the godless chatter and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, gnosis. For by professing it, some have missed the mark as regards the faith. This is the parting admonition of a Christian leader of the early 2nd century, writing in the name of the Apostle Paul to his disciple Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:21. The writer is warning his readers, that is, hearers, against a version of the Christian religion that presents itself as knowledge or gnosis, involving teachings meant either to complement or to replace the essential doctrines of the Christian faith. The writer warns that embracing such teachings will lead to missing the mark, by which he means essentially apostasy from the Christian faith. Later in the same century, St. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, Gaul, modern France, writing around the year 185, adopts the terminology that Paul uses, falsely called gnosis, to describe a number of Christian heresies that he thinks pose a danger to the Catholic faith. His 5-volume work, entitled Refutation and Overthrow of Falsely Called Knowledge, usually abbreviated as Against Heresies, provides in its first volume more or less detailed presentations of the doctrines of the heretics known to him. He then refutes these doctrines in the remaining 4 volumes, countering them with his interpretation of the Catholic faith based on the Church's creed and the teachings of the Lord and his apostles. Most of the heretics and heresies attacked by the good bishop as falsely called knowledge fall into a category of teaching usually referred to nowadays as Gnosticism. I say usually because there has arisen in recent times objections on the part of some scholars to the use of the term Gnosticism in scholarly discourse. It is argued, correctly, that Gnosticism is a term that was not in use in ancient times. It is also argued, again correctly, that the term Gnosticism has been used in so many different ways that it has led to a good deal of confusion as to what the term is supposed to mean. Nevertheless, I'm one who thinks there is some utility in retaining the term. In that case, what is needed is some clarity as to how the term is to be defined and what kinds of doctrines and practices should be included in the category Gnosticism. I want to make clear from the beginning that my own stance in this discussion is that of a historian of ancient Mediterranean and Greco-Roman religions, whose task it is to describe and interpret various religious trends as they appeared in the Greco-Roman world of the 1st centuries CE. Many of the various religions that were practiced by people in that period of time are easy enough to define. For example, a good deal is known about the worship of the Egyptian goddess Isis, not only in Egypt, but in the larger Greco-Roman world. The same can be said for Mithraism, widely practiced by members of the Roman military. Judaism, too, is practiced in its homeland and in the diaspora, is a well-known phenomenon in the history of Greco-Roman religions, as is Christianity in its various manifestations. Now the question is this: can we speak about Gnosticism as a religion comparable to Mithraism, or Judaism, or Christianity? And if so, how are we to define it in such a way as to do justice to the numerous sources at our disposal? The term Gnosticism was first coined in the 17th century by an Englishman named Henry Moore, who used it in an expository work on the 7 letters of the book of Revelation. He used it to describe the heresy in Thyatira, Revelation 2, and a colleague of him also used the expression the Gnostic heresy, Henry Hammond. The latter term comes out of the writings of St. Irenaeus. Gnosticism is a word, of course, that is made up by adding the suffix ism or ismos in Greek, to the adjective Gnostic or Gnostikos in Greek, meaning knowing or knowledgeable. It's clear that Henry Moore and others used the term Gnosticism in a pejorative way, with allegorical applications to 17th century Christian interdenominational polemics. But when Irenaeus used the term the Gnostic heresy against heresies 1:11:1, he was using a term that can also be taken in a neutral sense. For the Greek word hieresis simply means school of thought. Irenaeus was referring to a specific school of thought, a group of people who called themselves gnostikoi, that is, Gnostics, knowledgeable ones. This in chapter 25 of book 1. Use of the term Gnosticism in reference to the beliefs and practices of this particular group is not necessarily pejorative at all, even if the term was originally used that way in English. And it might be added that the suffix ism, in Greek ismos, was used by Jews and Christians in antiquity to refer to their own religions. The earliest examples are Judaismos, 2nd Maccabees 2, 8, and 14, 1st century CE, and Christianismos in Ignatius, Magnesians, Philadelphians, Romans. All 3 of these works of Ignatius use the term. As for the English word Christianity, it simply reflects the Latin suffix itas, equivalent to the Greek ismos. Now, the Greek adjective gnostikos was first coined by Plato to refer to a kind of science, and this in Statesman 25a-e, or 258e. And the term gained currency in philosophical circles. But what's different here is that the appropriation of this term by people, applying it to themselves, represents a significant innovation. And this usage is noted by both Christian and pagan writers from the 2nd century on. Central to this usage, as can be seen in the roots of the adjective, is the claim to a special kind of knowledge, gnosis. Irenaeus observed this, as can be seen from his use of the phrase falsely called knowledge, to apply to the heretics he was combating. And of course he was using the term that appeared already in the New Testament. So, for our purposes here, it's essential for us to know what kind of knowledge it was to which the Gnostics laid claim in terms of myth, ritual, beliefs, and practices. Irenaeus is especially helpful in this regard, for he supplies the starting point with a direct testimony about the Gnostic heresy, consisting of a lengthy quotation from one of the Gnostics' books. Now, thanks to the Nag Hammadi library discovery, we know that this excerpt is closely related to part of one of the Coptic texts called the Apocryphon, or Secret Book of John, which is now extant in 4 Coptic manuscripts. Study of this material reveals that this book is of central importance for our knowledge of the ancient Gnostic school of thought known to Irenaeus. So that particular snippet from Irenaeus is of central importance for our understanding of what can legitimately be called ancient Gnosticism. Now, can the term Gnosticism be applied more widely to other kinds of material beside the Apocryphon of John? As it turns out, there are a number of other texts we now have that are very closely related in terms of myth and ritual to the Apocryphon of John. These texts, taken together, constitute what scholars now refer to as Sethian or classic Gnosticism. The term classic Gnosticism is Bentley Layton's in his book, The Gnostic Scriptures. In addition, a number of other sources can be seen to be closely related in terms of their emphasis on gnosis, saving gnosis, and their mythology, related to classic or Sethian Gnosticism, including systems described by Irenaeus under the catch-all phrase, falsely called knowledge. Now, here we need to note a possible objection. As can be seen by its title, the Apocryphon of John is a Christian writing, featuring a revelation given by Jesus to his disciple John. Why then not refer to such a text, and others like it, as reflective of a variety of Christianity, rather than examples of a separate category of religion called Gnosticism? Why not just follow Irenaeus and the other early Christian heresiologists, heresy hunters, in viewing Gnosticism as a Christian heresy, rather than a distinct religious tradition originally independent of Christianity? That indeed is the position advocated by many historians of Christianity, but I've already made clear that I'm not one of those. I'm a more general historian of religions. When one takes a closer look at the Apocryphon of John, and we're going to take a closer look at it later on, one can see that the basic myth contained in it has no Christian features at all. What makes it a Christian work is the frame story and questions by John interpolated into the text by a Christian editor. In other words, an originally Gnostic myth has been Christianized editorially, with the addition of the frame story and the dialogue features, in a process whereby Jesus becomes the revealer of the mythological gnosis given in the core of the text. Now, there are a number of other texts for which the same thing can be found. For example, 2 other Nag Hammadi texts, Eugnostos the Blessed, found in Codices 3 and 5, and the Sophia, or Wisdom of Jesus Christ, found in Nag Hammadi Codex 3 and the Berlin Codex. Comparative study of the basic myth in the Apocryphon of John reveals that it is made up of an innovative reinterpretation of biblical and Jewish traditions. It is more likely that Gnosticism arose originally out of a Jewish milieu, and only subsequently came into contact with Christianity. More likely than that it arose from within early Christianity, which of course, some scholars still argue. If one wants to use the term heresy in this connection, one could argue that both Christianity and Gnosticism arose originally as Jewish heresies. Moreover, a historian of religions will look farther afield and consider available material that has no Christian connections at all. Material that can be categorized as Gnostic in terms of its content. I have here in mind the religion of the Mandaeans. The Mandaean material shows very interesting points of comparison with classic Gnostic writings, but the only connection it has at all to do with Christian tradition is hostility. From ancient times, the Mandaeans have been hostile to Jesus Christ while being more partial to John the Baptist. The Mandaeans of today constitute a still living remnant of ancient Gnosticism, which scholars like Kurt Rudolph, who is the world's greatest authority on Mandaeism, would push back to first century Palestine. So then, let's ask what the essential features of Gnosticism from the standpoint of the history of religions. Now, the first thing of utmost importance is that gnosis, knowledge in Gnosticism, is a prerequisite of salvation. What kind of knowledge are we talking about? In Gnosticism, saving gnosis comes by revelation from a transcendent realm, mediated by a revealer who has come from that realm in order to awaken people to a knowledge of God and the knowledge of the true nature of the human self. In Gnosticism, knowledge of God and knowledge of the self are two sides of the same coin. For the true human self is of divine origin, and salvation ultimately involves a return to the divine world from which it came. As for the bearer of revelation, this differs from one Gnostic system to another. In Christian forms of Gnosticism, the revealer is, of course, Jesus Christ. But in other forms of Gnosticism, other revealers are posited, often mythological beings, for example, Sophia or wisdom, in various manifestations, biblical characters like Adam or Seth, or other noted figures from the past, Zoroaster, Zostrianos. In Mandaeism, there is a mythological feature who is the revealer of gnosis called Manda de Haye, meaning in Mandaic, knowledge of life. A characteristic feature of Gnosticism is a dualistic way of looking at God, humanity, and the world, involving a radical interpretation of earlier traditions. In terms of theology, the ancient Gnostics split the transcendent God of the Bible into two: a super-transcendent supreme God, utterly alien to the world, and a lower deity responsible for creating and governing the world in which we live. This theology is more or less elaborated in various Gnostic systems of thought. For a number of Gnostic systems posit various divine beings inhabiting the divine world, as well as lower demonic beings involved in the creation and governance of the cosmic order. Indeed, in most Gnostic systems, the relationship between the higher and the lower realms is expressed in terms of a tragic split in the divine world that results in the genesis of the lower beings responsible for the cosmos. Human beings are split personalities as well. The true human is as alien to the world as is the transcendent God. The inner human self is regarded as an immaterial divine spark imprisoned in a material body. The human body and the lower emotive soul belong to this world, whereas the higher self, the mind or spirit, is consubstantial with the transcendent God from which it originated. Involved in this dualistic anthropology are creative reinterpretations of the creation stories in the book of Genesis. In terms of cosmology, the spatio-temporal universe in which we live, the cosmos, is regarded by Gnostics as a prison in which the true human self is shackled. Created and governed by the lower creator and his minions, it is the realm of chaos and darkness. That's the view of most of the ancient Gnostics. It must, of course, be admitted that some of the later versions of Gnosticism, this radical dualism is somewhat mitigated. Even so, the cosmos is regularly regarded as a product of creation and not in any sense eternal. Just as there was a time before time when the cosmos did not exist, so also is there a time after time when it will no longer exist. The goal of the Gnostics is to be saved from the cosmic prison in which it now exists, in which the soul now exists, and to be restored to the realm of light from which the true human self originated. Gnosis, knowledge, provides the means for achieving this and ensuring the passage of the soul after death back to God. Once the process of liberation is completed, that is, when all of the scattered souls of the elect are redeemed, or spirits I should say, the material world will either be annihilated or become subject to eternal darkness. Gnostic eschatology is basically a reinterpretation of standard biblical and Jewish eschatology. One of the chief characteristics of Gnosticism is mythopoeia, that is, the construction of elaborate myths through which revealed gnosis is transmitted. In giving expression to their basic beliefs, the ancient Gnostics put into story form their insights into the human predicament and the means of salvation. Mythopoeia was an ongoing activity of many Gnostic teachers, not illiterate teachers at all, who recorded and elaborated their mythology in revelatory literature, apocalypses, revelation dialogues, etc. The main themes of Gnostic mythology are, first of all, theosophy, elaborating on the transcendent God and the divine world; cosmogony, how the world came into being; anthropogony, involving the origin and imprisonment of human beings; and soteriology, how the human self can be saved. From what has been said so far, we can see that a prominent feature of ancient Gnosticism involves innovation and reinterpretation. But reinterpretation of what? Where did the earliest Gnostic teachers get their views of God, the world, and the human self? What sorts of religious or philosophical traditions did they use in coming up with the basic features of the Gnostic worldview? Various answers have been given to those questions by scholars over the last couple of centuries on research on Gnosticism. It used to be fashionable among historians of religions to trace the origins of Gnosticism back to Oriental sources, Babylonian or Iranian. But the Coptic sources now available to us as a result of the Nag Hammadi discoveries, have provided valuable new evidence for tracing those origins instead to Jewish sources. It is also evident from the study of the newer material, newer available material, that Platonist philosophy was a decisive factor in the development of the Gnostic worldview. So here I must introduce a little feature of history of Western philosophy, concentrating on Plato of Athens, 427 to 348 BCE, whom I regard as one of the most brilliant and seminal minds who ever existed amongst human beings. Around 388, he founded his famous school, the Academy, which had a continuous history until it was shut down by order of the Christian Emperor Justinian in 529 CE. Plato's dialogues and letters constitute an enormous legacy that has been studied and restudied both in antiquity and into the present. The early history of Platonism, after Plato, is conventionally divided into three eras. The Old Academy, featuring a good deal of skepticism, Middle Platonism, a sort of renewal of metaphysics, Middle Platonism dating from early 1st century BCE to the early 3rd century CE, and Neoplatonism, beginning with Plotinus, 205 to 270. An important feature of Platonism is its metaphysical dualism, which involves a distinction between an immaterial world of being and a material world of becoming. Material things of this world are basically copies of eternal immaterial forms in the realm of being. Late in his life, Plato wrote a dialogue called the Timaeus, which contains a myth of creation. In that myth, the divine creator is referred to as the demiurgos, which means craftsman in Greek. And this demiurgos, or demiurge, creates the physical world according to the eternal pattern in the world of immaterial forms. The product of that creation is the best of all possible worlds, given the intractability of the material out of which it was constructed. Plato did not actually believe in a literal beginning of the world of becoming. For him, the cosmos is eternal. Now, a similar kind of dualism can be found in Gnosticism, in that a radical distinction is made between the lower material world and the immaterial divine world above. Some Gnostics even took over the Platonic term for the creator, the demiurge. But for the Gnostics, this world is not at all the best of all possible worlds, nor is it eternal. Its creator is a God who is ignorant at best, and even malevolent in some Gnostic systems. Nevertheless, Gnostic dualism is hardly conceivable without Platonist dualism. Gnostic dualism can be seen as a reinterpretation of traditional Platonist dualism. Reflected in Plato's Timaeus is the new cosmology that became current in the Greco-Roman world from the 4th century BCE. Of course, it had more ancient Mesopotamian origins.